Hey folks, I could honestly listen to that song over and over again. It's by my buddy Chris Brune, who did
Hey
all of
folks, I
the.
could
Oh,
honestly listen to that song.
over and over again. Let me pause myself. My friend Chris Brune, who did the music, the guitar. He's a great guitarist out of Minneapolis with the band Quarterback Club, alongside my other good friend Grant, who designed one of the merchandise items that will be able to be purchased in the next month or so, next couple of weeks maybe. Let's be optimistic. Uh, but I need to get yeah, I gotta, that's some business we gotta attend to, but excited for all of you to be here, even the guy that came by and said capitalism is the shit, which is really funny. I honestly encourage more of that. I mean, uh, it's better than like what Charlie Kirk's doing now, which is like, who's controlling CNN? You know who. That seems to be Big Patrick. Thanks for the sub. Also, Micah Gelfand. Thanks for the super chat. Um, I got a big long interview for you with David Alexis, running for state senate in New York here. He's a very interesting guy. Organized a writers co-op, sort of taxi co-op here in New York. Now it's not just in New York. 7,000 members make it, I believe he says, the largest co-op in the states. But he's also running for state senate alongside this DSA slate. But I had a really good conversation with him. It went a little bit long, so while this is playing, I'm going to be playing NBA 2K. Uh, it will be, and I'll change this in Twitch now, just so people know what I'm playing. But I'll be playing 2K, and I'll be playing my franchise mode Timberwolves, complete with me, my character, a creative character, not the one that from my player where you have to, you know, literally work as hard as it takes to get into the NBA to get your player good. Um, and yeah, I think we'll listen to this with David Alexis. And I David and I just finished recording the think tank about 45 minutes ago. And so what I'm trying to say is I've done a lot of recording today. So you'll see me eating a burrito bowl in the background. And before I really dig into 2K. So I'll kind of front and center our interview for the first portion, and then maybe I'll bring up 2K a little bit slowly. But for now, I'm just going to pretty much maximize this and let you guys enjoy this interview. All right, welcome back, Left Reckoners. I'm Matt Lech, and joining me now is David Alexis. David is many things. He's an organizer, he's a child of Haitian immigrants, and now he is running for New York State Senate District 21. David, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's a great honor to be here with you, Matt. It's a little exciting as someone who's a major fan and patron of Left Reckoning.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I did not know David. I did not verify his patron status before. That's not why, just full disclosure. He did not buy his way out of this program. I've actually been familiar with David's work, starting with the Drivers Co-op, which I do want to get to in a little bit. But let's start at the very beginning. David, you are a child of Haitian immigrants. Now, folks who might not be super initiated into history might not be familiar that a lot of politics have been going on in Haiti, going back to the Haitian Revolution, the one that is neglected these days, and also with your grandfathers. Is that right? Can you just tell us a little bit about that part of your history?
Absolutely. So there were, I think, two bit of struggle that I think is endemic that connects our family with from the Haitian Revolution itself. Both of my parents are from the north of Haiti, where when the Bosal had run away from the plantations, they went into the north because that's where it was most mountainous. So we actually have some roots directly connected to like the Sans-Soucis and the amazing warriors who fought bravely during the revolution. But particularly on my father's side, you know, my grandma was the big matron of the family. She had effectively married to my one because one passed away. She had about like 18 kids, which is a lot of kids to have. Actually, sorry, 16 kids. Sorry, 16 kids with my grandma, and she and her second was my grandfather. Actually was part of the opposition party in Haiti during Papa Doc's reign, and actually had pushed against some of his policies. I don't think for altruistic purposes. This is I'll be honest with you, it's politics, but had paid the price for that, and had been and had sanctions and other issues that had happened as a result. On my mother's side, her father was the magistrate for the area outside of Port-au-Prince in Plaisance, where she was born. She is one of 18 children. There were she has no like full-blooded siblings. They're all half-blooded siblings, so take that with what you will. And he actually, when Papa Doc had been pushing for more of rice and resources to go into Haiti to sustain some of the turbulent times that had gone during his reign, had actually said, in a very moderate way, say, maybe don't take too much. It's hurting the people in the community. And Papa Doc had actually imprisoned him in one of the worst prisons in Haiti, where you can't actually even stand. So he spent about 6 months there. So he spent 6 months where he couldn't even stand in the prison. So it was forced onto his knees for the duration of that period. Very brutal piece of history, and kind of sets the stage, I guess, for a little bit of how my family kind of got here, kind of influencing our story, and getting to the point of why I organized and get involved in politics, because there's a little bit more of this piece as my family comes here.
What was your process of becoming aware of your sort of this family history? Was this something that was regularly spoken about, or is it something you came to later and started inquiring about? I'm curious about that.
It actually came later. It's so crazy because things that I learned, like my parents, you come here to the States, you're trying to integrate yourself. My dad had come here. My dad had come here in the 80s. My mom had been there a little bit early in the early 70s, and this was a period when anti-Haitian sentiment was at its highest. I know you guys are familiar with Pascal Ribeiro, who talks about what it was like in New York City. And while we actually had lived outside of, while my parents had settled right outside of New York City in like the Lower Hudson Valley, they had often worked in the city. So this is a sentiment that kind of expanded beyond that, right? So one of the things that I had learned after the fact, as I inquired about my history, especially, I have 2 daughters, 6 and 4. I had wanted them to learn more about the history of which they came from and whatnot. So as I got to learn more about our history from my parents, we learned that, oh, by the way, we were a union household. My mom was part of PEF, and my dad actually, before he became a physician, actually was forced to work in a factory. I can go back to that a little bit, where he actually worked for a union for that factory before he was eventually able to work as a physician, despite having his medical degree before he even came to the country. And then also I started learning a bit more of the struggle that was endemic to our family to get here. One of the biggest stories that to me was really interesting was that with my uncle Claude. So my uncle Claude is an electrician. He came here in 1970 through a program that was started, I think, by the U.S. government to bring more blue-collar workers, particularly like electricians and essential work labor that had a shortage of. And he was able to take advantage of that to go from Haiti, where he was paid almost a pittance. Like he would say, like pennies on the dollar. You can see his expression when he does it too. to being able to make a good living for himself, I guess here as an electrician. And he settled out in the Bronx, where he lives in the same apartment complex he's lived in since the 1970s. You know, he can't really afford to move anywhere else, if I'll be honest. But I was able to get that prime like rent that's under $1,000, which you don't really see anymore.
No, I barely see that in North Dakota still.
Right? So like, and he started the process of bringing my family here. One of the other things that is kind of crazy, a bit of his history that we learned, and this is something that we actually found in U.S. records of the mutiny that happened against Baby Doc, that my uncle Azu had taken part of. So my uncle Azu had been part of the Haitian Navy. They had mutiny against Baby Doc because they thought a lot of the injustices that was going under during his reign, and it failed, and they had retreated over the Guantanamo Bay. Now, they have never quite broken down the experience of being in Guantanamo Bay, but we understood because of how U.S. Foreign policy is, they were going to send them back to Haiti, where they were going to be, where those who had been sent back were not going to live. So my uncle was starting this process of what I guess they call chain migration, able to go down to Florida, appeal for him to be brought to Haiti and bring him over and actually allow him to start working in the various type of blue collar jobs that he was able to get. And then slowly but surely, my uncle would appeal for other members of our family to go be brought in. And it comes down to my dad, who's actually the youngest son of my grandmother. And he was able to go to medical school in Mexico, which was cool. It was paid for by my Uncle Azu and Uncle Claude, who were able to get here before him. And quite literally, after he got his MD from the University of Guadalajara, he was not able to come here. They said we don't need you here. So they had to apply from the same way they applied for my Uncle Azu and others to get him over here. And even though he was here with his MD, could not actually get his residency or work as a doctor, any of this stuff. He actually got to work as a factory worker. And I believe worked on different appliances and other things like that. I did that for 12 years, despite the fact that he had his medical degree. And when he was finally able to get into a hospital, he was able to work in the hospital as a data entry clerk. And then this is actually around the time I was born. Was finally able to get a residency where he was able to go to his residency at Albert Einstein, which is now like Montefiore, and begin working at Rikers Island as a psychiatrist, which he works as now. He doesn't work in Rikers Island anymore. He went to the VA system and is now settled in, after doing a tour of VAs in like Kansas, Oklahoma, is now in Georgia, where he works for a private hospital, still at his age, in his 70s, and as in another prison.
Wow, I mean, that is quite a life right there. It's, and I mean, and you hear that a lot. Like, and it's so curious. Like when these guys came to the States, like I guess there probably was a lot of pressure to downplay the previous history. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Like oftentimes, and anyone who watches this who's of the Haitian diaspora, you always know when you were bad, your parents threatened to say, "Oh, you're not listening. We're going to send you back to Haiti." I almost went with the Haitian accent. I don't do it as well as some others, but but yeah, they already know. So it wasn't until you get older and you're kind of more curious about your history, where you come from, and want to draw that connection, especially, given from the earthquakes of the 2010s, and want to do something for your homeland, so we still have cousins and extended family members, even from my neighbor currently to family have where I grew up in like the Hudson Valley. We have so many members that are back there, and it's really important to note because my family is huge. Not as big as my wife's family, but I have something like over 200 cousins. So I don't know all my cousins. Most of them I don't know. Some who are in the district, legit. I actually have met people in the district. It's like, oh, Alexis? Oh, and then they'll go on about trying to identify who, do you know this Alexis? And I can never say absolutely no, because we could be related. But I would have, it's kind of hard to kind of parse out, I think, the family history. And I'll be honest, a lot of the old guard still remain very I think just from their experience of trying to get settled here, often remain very close-lipped about some of the histories and some of what they went through, coming here, getting settled, and trying to make a life for us, the next generation.
Yeah, that's a fascinating thing. Just as a side bit, I been looking into some of my family history and like the Germans and folks coming to the Midwest, and it's just funny how like I had no idea like St. Louis was taken over by like sort of almost quasi-Marxist commune in the 1870s, and that was a lot of because of like German speakers who were radical came over here and they were familiar with that sort of stuff. But then you get like I think American empire is a little bit smarter about which Germans they start inviting in. So you name a city Bismarck, like where my family, where I'm from, you name a city Bismarck after a guy who's like very law and order conservative type of folks. Then you're but yeah, that's very fascinating. So let's move a little bit also before we get to the political the state senate campaign. Your work with the Riders Co-op, just introduce that to folks because I think that is a really interesting experience.
So the Drivers Cooperative came after a lot of organizing that had been happening in the space. So it's the taxi service industry has always been a very contentious one from the moment it's been regulated as industry when the city of New York created TLC licenses in 1912. The very next year, you started seeing labor struggles. And I'm going to fast forward a little bit with the history because it's rife with immigrants of all kinds, Italian, Irish, and eventually more those of the African and the Middle Eastern diaspora kind of settling in. Also many from Russia who had eventually come over. You start to see the makeup of it change, but there have been very intense labor struggles within this. It's a very rich history, and I always like to speak about my one of the other co-founders, Eric Foreman, who's been in the labor industry for labor organizers for like 15 years, who is very good on the history. But for the sake of this piece that gets to where we are, I like to jump all the way to like the Bloomberg administration, because this is where the next turn of the story begins. Because by this point, there are many adults my age who benefited from parents who were taxi drivers. Now, my dad was not a taxi driver, but there are many others I know who had parents who are drivers. I know drivers who have kids like my age who were able to buy a home or be able to send their kids to school off of the labor that they did driving. And driving has always been a hard one because whether you're a yellow medallion operator like the yellow taxis, or you are how the city qualifies for hire vehicle, which includes Uber and Lyft and rideshare, but also includes a lot of the black car bases, like Dial Car, if you're familiar with those, and some of the other heritage bases that you might see across the city that still exist but are largely diminished in the wake of Uber and Lyft, right? And you have the city's in a rough spot. Austerity has not been great for many people across the city, and the city needs a little bit of money. So Bloomberg, in his infinite wisdom, decides to deregulate the medallion market and invites a whole slew of crappy players, the likes that were involved in the subprime mortgage debacles. In fact, one thing I always like to illuminate for people to understand how scummy this pile of investors were. Michael Cohen actually was arrested because of taxi medallion fraud for his part in this system that was established by Bloomberg. And you see when Tish James would sue the city of New York after she became lieutenant governor, that she was suing the city for $800 million, which was about what the city of New York made in profit off of the backs of the yellow medallion operators. And this is after suicides that had been conducted not only by yellow medallion operators, but also in the black car industry. So jumping back a bit, you see the deregulation that happened in the 2000s. Next, start to being billed as, drivers are going to have more assets. Your medallions are going to be of higher value. It's going to be great, right? And at this point, because The market's much harder. It's harder to buy a new medallion. Many drivers who had retired had sold it off to more and more corporations. So at this point, currently, most medallions are owned by corporations. So there's about 12 to 13,000 yellow cab medallion operators, and less than 1,000 actually own, about 1,000 or less than 1,000 actually own their medallions. So that tells you how many of them are owned by corporations, right? Some of them are black card bases, some of them are small family things, but there's plenty of whom who are backed by, once again, people who are in private the subprime mortgage debacle. And you begin to see, as particularly in the black car industry, where I like to focus for the sake of rideshare, that there's a whole bunch of black car operators who are like small fiefdoms, where if you don't have a relationship with the dispatcher, you are kind of shit out of luck. And drivers are struggling. They try to get out of yellow cab because when I started driving, it was about $740 a week to rent a yellow medallion, which is really expensive as opposed to what it was to rent for Uber and Lyft for hire vehicle, which is $350, $400 a week, which still shitty numbers, but
right. For what? For what? What is that money going for?
But that's what I'm saying. Like, we have to remember, this is a largely immigrant-driven base. The majority of drivers are immigrants, and this has been the case for the majority. I think 95% of this workforce are immigrants, and as the pool of immigrants have changed to being more like from the African diaspora, the Latin diaspora, or the Middle Eastern diaspora, they filled up more, or even the Chinese diaspora. Can't forget our South Asian drivers, particularly from Bangladesh or from mainland China. These have started to really make up larger and larger swaths of this workforce. So they're ripe for exploitation. These are the ones who are responsible for not only taking care of their families here, but they're also, some of them are responsible for taking care of their families at home. There are villages that are basing their survival off of the ability for a driver to drive. So a driver will drive not only like 40 hours a week, which is like part-time, drive like 60, 70, 80 hours, 8, 10, 12, 14, sometimes 16 hours in a day, working 6-7 days a week. This is a standard work. That is still the standard workload for drivers who are driving, who are working. And so when Uber and Lyft come into this space and say that you can get a trip that's just as long, and the only criteria for getting a trip is that you're just close enough, is like a revolution. And then so many drivers started getting more involved. Then you start to see drivers start saying, oh, Uber starts doing the incentives. Like when I got started in driving in 2016, they were offering $1,000 grant, not grants, but $1,000 bonuses if you were to do 20 trips, which covered my expenses of getting in this industry, which for me was about $650, $700, but can be as expensive as $750, $800 to get started with your TLC device, because of all the requirements that the city puts on you to qualify. And I didn't do yellow cab because that $740 a week was a little too steep, and it's more now, mind you. I got started with a 2015 Hyundai Sonata that had 80,000 miles that I was responsible for paying $450 a week to get started driving Uber and Lyft. And it was really annoying because the leasing companies I chose was one of the ones that Uber had marketed as the ones to choose. They chose like 4. I'm not going to say their name, but they're based in right outside of my district, actually. And they had a deal with Uber where my payment for the vehicle was actually taken out of my wages. So regardless of how much I made or whether I worked that week, they would minus $450 from my Uber account. So if I didn't make enough or I didn't drive that week because I had to take care of family, other things, this is after I became an Uber driver after my oldest daughter was born, as because the work I was doing as a community health worker, doing that social work, the home health aide work, that wasn't really cutting it when you have a little one on the way, So I had to drive. And this is just the story of thousands of drivers. To put in perspective, at the peak in 2019, there were 85,000 TLC licensed drivers who drove in New York City, who powered what was at its peak about 750, 800,000 trips per day. There's a dashboard that's because this data is all public. If you're interested, I can share that later. Of all of the trips that was just being powered just for Uber and Lyft. If you include the black car side and the yellow medallion space, you're talking about over like 1 million trips per day in New York City, which is a lot of business. The rideshare business alone in 2019 was about like 5 billion in gross just coming from bookings from Uber, Lyft, Juno, Via, all the other app-based companies. So it tells you how big this is of industry and why a lot of the from Wall Street to other scavengers, maybe you want to call them that, but you could also say is business operators wanted to get involved with this industry. And because you're dealing with immigrant workers or the children of immigrants, they are just easy marks that you can assess fee after fee after fee, and they will pay it because if they don't, they cannot provide for their families. They cannot provide for everyone's count on them. And it's a very intense process. So you can imagine that, this is unacceptable. So going back to the labor organizing. So from around, I want to say, after Uber and Lyft started to reduce what they were going to pay drivers in 2016 and 2017, many people who had organized in this space began to organize again, even more harshly or more strongly within the for-hire vehicle space. This is a space that hasn't really had as much labor organizing until like the 2016, 2017 area. And you began to see more and more labor actions. I was actually part of movements that actually shut down the Brooklyn Bridge twice, shut down the FDR highway twice, shut down the 59th Street Bridge once. We had protested several times outside of the heart of the industry, which is in Long Island City. And we even had a major protest outside of Gracie Mansion. And this was to just get basic things like a porta potty in the staging areas at the airports, because drivers spend a lot of time at the airports. When I started, there was none of those. So you had to get creative about how you were going to use the bathroom, which is a little embarrassing to say, but was the reality.
But I'll just say on that, like, I mean, the one thing I've noticed, I've been in New York for 10 years now. The bathroom situation here really makes you be strategic. Like, if I have to walk across Brooklyn, like, I'm going to the bathroom first, because you do not use the bathroom here without paying like, $15 to patronize some business, basically.
Oh yeah. And as for a driver, you have to add like parking where you're going to put your car so you can use the bathroom. If you park in a parking garage, that the minimum fare is $20, $25. Even the staging grounds that they have in the city, oftentimes there's not enough of them. And honestly, we want to move beyond the vehicles. And I'll say that you'll go into it when we talk about my policy as for state senate. But like, we are not taking care of the people who are doing essential work, particularly because it's the same group of drivers who don't just do Uber and Lyft, but also are responsible for the Access-a-Ride, which is how a lot of people with disabilities are getting transportation. The MTA's program for transporting disabilities, they used to use these white blocky vans that block up the street. They would break down. They weren't well maintained and whatnot. So the city's answer to that was to go to, once again, the for-hire vehicle fleet that or the for-hire vehicle drivers or operators that are there and are largely powering Access-a-Ride. They also do non-emergency medical transportation. So if you're not getting like an ambulance and you have to get to a doctor, and if this is going to be paid by Medicaid, this is also handled by the same fleet of drivers. So once again, when you don't provide a good working condition for these workers, and you force them into embarrassing situations or to just to come out of pocket constantly to pay for their bathrooms, this is rough. And so we pushed back against stupid fees that they're trying to, as I mentioned earlier. We actually got what is called the utilization rate, which was the first attempt to get a minimum wage for hire vehicles, the first of its kind across this entire country. This actually was passed in 2018, and it went into effect in 2019. And Lyft and Juno actually was supposed to be the nice guys. I have a story about Juno, but if we have time, we can go into it later. Yeah. They sued the city to hold the money in escrow so they wouldn't have to pay it out. They failed, and they ended up doing so, and they came up with what was the final solution to this, which was the lockout. So after flooding the market for years with more and more drivers, to where we have tens of thousands, nearly 100,000 drivers operating with Uber and Lyft on this space, they decided that they didn't want to pay this increased pay floor that was created. So they began to lock out drivers if there was too many of them in certain areas because it wasn't profitable. And then those drivers would have to, on their own dime, drive into other parts of the city in hopes of being able to get active. Sometimes they had to schedule your time to be on, but because, once again, they didn't accommodate these drivers, it was saying, oh, you are responsible for figuring out how you're going to get the money. And because, once again, families are counting on your ability to make this money, if you couldn't, you were shit out of luck. And it's at this period when the pandemic hits and brings drivers even lower, because now you can't drive. People aren't taking the trips. Drivers have to choose do I take care of my health and my family, or do I take a risk and drive during a pandemic? And there was plenty of drivers who passed away because they caught COVID during the early stages because they couldn't afford to take time off. You know, I happen to have asthma. Actually, how I learned how to have asthma is another story, but I was not able to drive. So I actually took the time to do a lot of mutual aid work with some of the other drivers who had organized around this space, providing mental health counseling, getting access to the Black Card Fund, which was another struggle that came out of struggles beforehand that had some union support to kind of get to that point. And 2020 was, I think, a rough year for many drivers, myself included. And it got to the point where some of the drivers were like, we gotta do something better than this. There's been an idea that drivers are responsible for paying for their own vehicles, their phone, all of the expenses, the licensing, and all Uber really does is kind of match you with the customer. And we thought we could do that too. We could have our own app. And it wasn't until some of the fellow organizers around this space said, yeah, we can actually do that. We can respond to what drivers want. So in 2020, the Drivers Cooperative is incorporated as a worker cooperative business. And it was incorporated as worker cooperative because we didn't want to reproduce what we saw time and again in this industry. Because with yellow cab operators, you saw that was a mess. Black car operators, it was a mess. With rideshare, it was supposed to be the answer, but then they were betrayed. Mm-hmm. Even Juno, which was a much better option, even though in its final incarnation before it closed its doors, was much better in how it treated drivers compared to Uber and Lyft. But they had a promise where they were going to give drivers equity if they could drive an insane amount of hours. If I remember correctly, the driver can. It's been a minute since I remember the formula, but you had to drive about 30 to 35 hours per week for a period of over the course every week on average. They let you get away with it on average over the course of 3 months to get your quote unquote master promissory notes to be converted into actual equity. So it was a very high bar, but because drivers are doing insane hours, it made sense in driver logic. It doesn't make sense outside, but in driver logic, it made sense. And then when Juno reached its peak, it was actually bought by Get, an Israeli rideshare company. They bought it for hundreds of millions of dollars. Tom and Marco, who was the founder of Juno, who actually got his money from when he sold Viber, decided, I'll do the same here. I'll sell Juno to you. I'll cash out. And Get, one of the first things Get did was try to buy drivers out of their shares. I remember my share, I got $100 for my sake, and there was no real pathway to actually materialize my my promissory notes into actual shares. So I just ended up just taking $100. There was other drivers who, like one of the co-founders, Ken Lewis, who did not accept that. But what Get ended up doing was they took all the valuable assets out of Juno and let the company fizzle out, leaving drivers holding the bag with all this equity they're supposed to get that didn't do anything. So once again, the co-op is supposed to be different. So we figured as a work cooperative business, we could avoid all those pitfalls that drivers have been worked over, mistreated, lied to, and abused time and again through this industry, and actually ensure that by giving ownership to drivers that we could have something that would be better than what we had seen. So, as one of the founding organizers, I was actually the first organizer that was brought into this team. I'd known the organizers for years at this point, and we started our drive our organizing drive in like December 2020. And from 2020, when we started this, we have now 7,000 members, making us the largest worker cooperative in the country. We have raised over $3 million, 1.9 of it crowdfunded. We have raised over 800,000 in grants and have really been able to build this up from that. And a lot of this has just been off of drivers, despite being skeptical, despite having every reason to not believe that something better could be done, still wanted to try to build something. And that's why, in the first 3 months of us doing our organizing drive in December 2020, 3 months later, we had 2,700 drivers in our universe. To put it in perspective of how fast this growth was and continues to be. Yeah. We had launched, we had our big coming together moment after struggling to kind of navigate funds, because while we were able to raise all this money, we didn't really have any real money to do any of these operations till like the fall of 2021. So all the way through that, it's been bootstrapping through cooperative loan funds that were kind enough to give us a couple dollars, and hustling hard through that to that initial point. On May Day in 2021, we had our coming together of drivers. So that photo you see on our website with all the drivers there at Flushing Meadows Park was on May Day, in honor of what we were trying to do. And then we launched our operations on like June 1st. Right now, we're doing an extra hard focus on access ride, on emergency medical transportation, some of the contracted trips, the contracts that we have with the city of New York, like doing Department of Education transportation, things like this, as we prepare to do another relaunch for rideshare, because the mandate that we've always had has always been for rideshare. And I say this because there's many people in the progressive community who are very key to why we're even in this position right now, why our co-op continues to exist. But I know that you're gonna probably hear a lot more about our push. And this has not only just been in the operations that we do for Access Ride, non-emergency potential, the contract trips that we do, but it also has been the forefront for a lot of our advocacy as well. We actually right now have a policy agenda that you'll probably hear a lot of in the media very soon, where we are pushing for legislation to be passed to improve the experience of drivers through a process that was a democratic process that was led by our drivers. We sent surveys out to thousands of drivers. Hundreds actually got involved. As you know, not everyone's ever going to be involved at all times, but we had hundreds of drivers get involved with a meticulous process where we carved out 6 policies at the city and at the state level, 6 at the city, 6 at the state, so for a total of 12. That are going to improve the conditions for drivers, not only for drivers, but for the communities that they serve, because they are very much part of the families, whatnot. So that piece you'll probably hear a lot more in the news very soon. I'm giving you guys a little heads up on on that piece there.
And I think what's interesting is, like, your perspective from that driver, the driver co-op experience is, I mean, that's a very up close and personal look at how capitalism operates. I mean, look at Juno, right? And I mean, the one thing, like, it is on a basic level, the reason to get excited is we could just make an app, right? And that's what Uber has. But what Uber also has is a lot of venture capital, where they can, where they're rich people, like. It's great. Crowdfunding is great, but like when you talk about all these guys who have been living through an era of very cheap money and been sucking up all that and can just, deploy that, like when you say like Uber originally was very attractive from a value standpoint because of that, and that it wasn't because they thought of the best, most efficient app. It's because they were able to flood the zone with venture capital. And I feel like, and I've talked to even drivers since, like, there's a awareness that like the money is like the plug's being pulled by the people up top.
Absolutely. The one thing that continues to, I think, be very difficult is, as we've been developing and revamping our app to do for this extra launch, it takes development time, and it has not been an easy thing. And it's been expensive, and we don't have the ability to say, oh, we can hire all the engineers that we need. We can hire whatnot. And while the cooperative has been able to build a team of people from all around the world to kind of put this together, at one point we had volunteers from not only all across the United States, but from Brazil, all over Latin America, stuff like that. Like, it still, you can't build a business off of volunteer power alone. Let's be 100%. Right. It was very beneficial.
Yeah, like Uber literally bought the entire Carnegie Mellon robotics department to try to automate drivers away like a few years ago, right? Like that's something that you can start a Kickstarter. You're not going to be able to do that.
No. So while we're very much in a position where we can continue to build up and kind of we're able to be stable. And honestly, even if we were to take only like 1 or 5% of the rideshare market, we're talking about this company becomes a multi-million-dollar business. That's how crazy that is. And even with the way that with what we've been able to cobble out, from January 1st of 2022 to now, we have paid nearly $3 million in wages to drivers. Not what the co-ops take, just straight to wages to drivers. And that's just off of like what is considered scraps and how big this market is. So just to really hammer out how much money is kind of involved with this game.
Yeah, and I mean that's fascinating. So now let's move to electoral politics. And you know that, I mean, frankly, that experience is like one when we see candidates, like that's very important to have like a worker grounded experience. And so I'm just curious, like you're running for a state senate in District 21 in New York here. First of all, who's there? I saw you mentioned the Mansion of New York. Tell us about that, and what can be done from your perspective in this seat with somebody who isn't a Joe Manchin type.
Absolutely. So Kevin Parker is the current incumbent in District 21. He's been in office since 2002, effectively when he won his last election. He is part of the Energy and Telecommunications Committee in the state Senate, and he's also part of the Democratic leadership as the whip. So he has, one of the major issues with him is when we talk about a need for big change, right? Especially how problematic New York politics has been. There's been a lot, I know you guys have covered a lot about how machine-driven New York politics are and how closed that system is. And one of the biggest issues, I think, with Kevin Parker is that after the 2019 push, when we had that amazing push in 2018 with the No IDC movement, we had even Julia Salazar go into the state Senate. In 2019, we had a whole bunch of tenant protections being introduced, and we actually had a big push for climate legislation. But not all of the pieces of legislation were passed. Like Good Cause was not passed, which would actually require landlords to give tenants a lease. It would have put a cap on how much rent could be increased, and other little protections they would expand for tenants. That wasn't passed. And then you had the climate bills that had gotten through were not, there was no funding attached. So the legislation was passed for all these goals. We're going to get to 70% renewable by 2030 and all these other things. The money to actually do those things were not allocated. And here is Kevin Parker, who has taken the most amount of money from any fossil fuel company in the entire state Senate, the most amount of money, and acts as a major barrier to a lot of this change. So while he is not necessarily the most powerful person in the state Senate or in the state legislature, he is a very important piece for navigating getting this legislation through the state legislature. In fact, one of the key bills that we have, the Build Public Renewables Act, which is part of our public power side of the bills, which is to put all of the renewable energy construction under NYPA, the New York Power Authority, which was established during the New Deal era. So the idea is that we could allow the New York Power Authority, which is not currently allowed, to to rapidly build renewable energy construction here in New York State, to actually get that power, and literally kind of instead of relying on Con Edison, National Grid for a lot of these things, we could just do that. We could just do that through the public sector. And Kevin Parker is the prime sponsor of the bill, and part of the reason why he's a prime sponsor is that he's the chair of the Energy Telecommunications Committee. If you want him to get onto it, you got to give him the chance to get that bill, and he sat on it, and he didn't even let it get through the state Senate until we ran this campaign against him. He actually passed. He lets it go through, and then when it goes to the floor, he's not even there to even fight for the very bill that is his actual bill. He wasn't there. Which kind of tells you how important it was. It was to him at the end of the day. And you add the fact that he took his name off of good cause eviction, which I talked about, where rent and housing is one of the biggest issues in New York City. Everything, you guys already know, everything comes from housing. You begin to realize that this is not the type of legislature who want to be involved. Now, there are other things, character flaws that Kevin Parker has. I try to make sure that I'm not doing that. I always say check his Wikipedia page if you want to get that other part, that other texture of who he's been. But I will. I want to really focus on the legislative piece with him.
Yeah, and I mean that's a really important thing, like the Julia Salazar win, and those sorts of efforts were sort of like and the IDC, getting the IDC out of there. For folks who don't know, the IDC was basically like Cuomo decided he needed a new caucus of basically moderates to stop any sort of like, because the Republicans aren't a real factor in New York State politics. We need to like create them, literally. And getting rid of them was sort of like a breaking the dam. But I feel like this further push with like you and the rest of the DSA slate and folks like that is how we can, like, New York needs to be a leader on these issues. It can't be stuck in the past.
Absolutely. Could you believe that Nebraska has more wind and solar than New York? Because we're at 6%. They have more. Like, it's insane. Texas has way more. And as you mentioned, we need to be a leader. We can be a leader. We have the progressive organizations, the climate organizations, and institutions here to do so. But the reason we don't is because of this arrangement. Honestly, Cuomo's structure of it, like a lot of what Cuomo built, still remains even after he's been ousted. Sort
of like the ghosts of the IDC.
Oh yeah. So while they're no longer in office, there are a lot of the elements that enabled them that still remain. And it's one of the reasons why primarying them is so important. So the big wins that we had in 2020 with the DSA slate that had won then, and then with this new slate, when you add both the DSA slate and the working family slate, because we both had candidates in the assembly races. There were about 16 challenges all across New York State. We lost, unfortunately, most of them, but we learned a lot about different communities that we needed. We were able to continue the organizing that needed to be done in all these different spaces, and we did the work of building the coalition up. And we did get a very important win in upstate New York with it's not upstate, but in the mid Hudson Valley with Sarah Hannah Suresh, who beat Kevin Cahill, who was the other barrier to climate change out in the assembly, who was a major part of the power base of leadership in the state assembly, the lower house of the state legislature, and had been in office since 1994, which is a very long time to be in office. So we are very much looking to do the same here, continue this fight in the city. There's my race, there's Kristen Gonzalez's race, and we personally believe that, once again, change doesn't start with politicians. I want to get that. Right. I want to start that first and foremost. It starts with the people and the movement. But politicians can be a very effective vector, tool, or vehicle through which the change can happen. I think that you guys cover extensively through your work about what happens when there's good policy that allows workers to begin to organize, to build power, and to push the needle, and then put pressure on those very same legislators who are open to it to make the changes that are necessary. That's how the New Deal worked. That's how we got a lot of stuff, the Civil Rights Movement passed. It's through people, organizers. So our strategy is, I think that the left as it is, I know there's a lot of arguments about that there isn't an actual left and everything like that, but the leftists that are committed to making the change, we don't have the luxury, I think, of tactics. We just got to throw everything at the wall and see what sticks, but also be very clear about learning the lessons of not only the past, but and I'm talking about like the long past from the movements that have worked, but the ones that have happened recently, because the biggest utility of past, why as left we historicize the past, is because we want to build the tools for for the future by understanding our current moment and how we got there. I'm only saying things that you already know. A lot
I
of
know these are all things, and trust me, I've seen a lot of interviews with the people running for office, and these are all things that, even though they seem like common sense, it's good to know that the people running are aware of them and take them important. So yeah, by all means.
Absolutely. So just going back into with this race, we have one of the most diverse districts in Brooklyn, while Queens is the most diverse borough. In Brooklyn, this is a community that this district is overwhelmingly Caribbean, from not only just the Virgin Islands. Haitians actually make the biggest plurality of that Caribbean diaspora. You have a huge piece of a lot of progressive community. We don't have Park Slope, which is the heart of the progressive part of Brooklyn, but we have like Prosper Park South, which is a huge chunk of that. We have a growing Muslim community in this community. There's a little Pakistan in the district around the very western piece, with a large number of Pakistani people, and that community has been growing. And then you also have a little bit of the Bengali community that's also growing in there. And then you have a strong, ever growing a part of the Latin diaspora that finds its home here too. The last redistricting, because the redistricting was a bit of a mess. This went from a district that had, like I said, the biggest progressive base in Brooklyn, where it included Park Slope. That part was not really supportive of Parker when he had his comptroller race in 2020. That entire part was cut out for the most part. Maybe coincidence? I don't know, but I'm just gonna say that. And then we saw the addition of like Brownsville, where a lot of the organizing work that I've done for quite some time was. That part got cut out, and then they added a huge Republican base from like more of Mill Midwood and Mill Basin, which is a large contingent of Republican. So the way the primary pool of Democratic voters has shrunken a bit, but it still is a very vast, very big district. This district, there's nearly about 400,000 people who are going to be represented in the state Senate district. So it tells you how, this is a lot bigger than the assembly races, and a big representation of Brooklyn, nonetheless.
Yeah, I mean that's a lot of people.
Yes.
Yeah, let's talk. Oh, you go ahead.
No, please.
Well, I wanted to ask you about healthcare. I'm somebody who spent the first years here following the time where I was able to jump out of my parents' insurance, going on the exchanges, which was not fun, and wondering, like, can't the state of New York just step up here? What is talk to us about healthcare.
So healthcare is one of the biggest things that has been a major driver for it. My parents are healthcare workers. They're clinicians. All several family members, we're from the Caribbean. There's a lot of us that have like the chronic leading cause of death, all that stuff. That has kind of in the background. But what made it more clear to me that we needed to do something about it was being on the front lines with my wife. So my wife has sickle cell disease, and sickle cell disease is the largest genetic disorder that affects the genetic disorder that affects the most amount of people in the country. If you're talking about inherited genetic disorders, the greatest amount of population. We have here in New York State the second largest concentration of people with sickle cell disease, the largest of which is in New York City, and the largest concentrations you'll find in Brooklyn, in the district, and in the Bronx. So seeing my wife, deal with Brookdale Hospital and the care that she tried to get was a mess. She not only seeing it, but hearing the stories about how from when she was young, staying on a health insurance plan was hard because she would get into she would have a sickle cell crisis, which happens when the person with sickle cell disease has the majority of the red blood cells are not able to hold oxygen because of some form of abnormal hemoglobin. That's what sickle cell disease is, marked by abnormal hemoglobin. So so they're not able to have enough oxygen being transported to all the different cells. So you have rapid cellular death, which is very painful because this can happen to anyone in your body. My wife has talked about crises in her eyes, in her face, in her hips, in her arms, in her skin, all over. It can happen wherever the part of the body that's not getting enough oxygen. So it's intensely painful. And to give you a perspective, my wife told me that after giving birth to 2 of our kids, she would rather give birth again than go through another sickle cell crisis. So, like, I'm a dude. I can't really fathom that because I don't give birth.
No, childbirth was the gold standard. Yeah.
Right. But you hear all the time of many women talk about how painful that is. And to hear that this is an order of magnitude greater than that, I think I use that for kind of painting that picture. And whenever she would go into crises, because of how shitty our healthcare system is, they would charge a lot because it's through the ER care. And after going through a crisis or two in a year, they would drop her and her family from the plan. So not only was she not getting healthcare, but her parents and all of her family who were on the plan would get dropped from the plan. And it would happen time and again and again and again and again. And one of the beautiful things about Obamacare was that she could finally stay on a health insurance plan, go into crisis, and not get kicked off of her health insurance. Quite literally. That was it was amazing. But even there's a lot of issues because now one of the things that happens is that because she gets Medicaid reimbursed through like the stupid healthcare system that we have here in New York through the portal or whatever. What tends to happen is that sometimes she goes to the hospital, she needs to get a treatment, and it will be rejected by the insurance. And oftentimes she has to get an appeal to Medicaid to cover more of the bill to get that. And it always puts like an albatross over our heads because while 9.5 times out of 10 the appeal is successful, but there's always this period where treatment is delayed, 1, but then also 2, you have to wonder, is this going to be successful again? Likely it will, but if it isn't, then you're dropped off like a $40,000 bill on your head because that's how much a hospitalization can cost. And the idea is that the insurance company doesn't want to cover a lot of this. They want more Medicaid to cover this, so they'll reject it. Or rather, the hospital may want to make a little bit more money. Fun fact, Brookdale was recently bought out by a Russian billionaire that owns like One Brooklyn Health. And Brookdale, Brookdale, Kingsbrook, and Interfaith, 3 hospitals in Central and East Brooklyn that is largely Black and brown, largely working class neighborhoods. That a lot of these hospitals are now owned by a Russian billionaire who has started the process of phasing out or defunding the parts of the program that are not profitable and focusing on that which is profitable. And the adult sickle cell program that my wife was in was closed. The pediatric one is maintained because it gets funded from CHIP, federal funding, so that's good and stuff. But when you are transitioning to adult, which a lot of adult teenagers and young adults kind of want to stay in as long as they can only stay into it till they're like 21. It's like you're kind of like, you're an adult now. Good luck. We're not going to give you any guidance on how to manage your care, have a doctor follow you, any of that stuff. None of that. And it's kind of frustrating because, there's a huge population. For the first time, there's a geriatric population of people with sickle cell disease, more adults with sickle cell disease, mild than ever because they used to die off like before they would make it to the end as a result of recent innovations and investments that had happened. And this is really frustrating because sickle cell has been researched for decades, but just like much of the experimentations that we've seen with African Americans, they had been used sickle cell disease to kind of study other diseases and use the benefits of that initial investment for research in other diseases that were considered more profitable, more valuable to research. But eventually they got their shit together and did something for sickle cell disease, and those recent innovations, particularly starting around the 80s, has resulted in a longer lived population. So this is a big deal, and to kind of give you an idea of why this is so problematic that there's not a proper program, is that right now, for my wife and hundreds of other sickle cell patients, there is only one nurse practitioner who oversees their care, not a physician, because there's no physicians for them, despite the fact that we do have a hematology and oncology department there. But so there's hematologists there, plenty. My wife was seen by a hematologist for years there. But because of this recent change, after being brought up by, there's no hematologists. There's only a nurse practitioner who's responsible for taking care of hundreds of sickle cell patients. So there's always tons of things getting left in the weeds. And as a result of her care, with constant delaying of care or saying that we're not going to take this, but we will take it, but only if we can charge the government more money of this money than us. There's this constant shifting that just results in this shit care. And the end result is that people like my wife have worser health outcomes. They have to spend more time sick, less time getting care, and more of their lives taken away because they have to deal with a lot of this bullshit. Even with this last hospitalization, I don't want to belabor the point, but my wife had a lot of issues because, once again, it was supposed to be mediated by the nurse practitioner. So there was a lot of delays, even though she's in crisis. They're saying that her blood work's bad, so she needs to be hospitalized, but they can't really administer their care properly because the paperwork isn't being done properly, which even then, that's a mess in of itself. And she is just, she's stabilized, which is good, but she's just not going to get the care that she needs that's just going to spend extra time where she is not able to be with our family, be with our kids, that she has to spend in limbo while the paperwork shit gets handled. And that's kind of where she is like right now today. Yeah. And this is not common to her. This is not unique to her. I want to be very clear. There are thousands of sickle cell patients all across this city, even more thousands across this state who have a similar experience. And I would argue that my wife, from by account of other sickle cell patients, gets better care because she has an advocate like myself and others who advocate harder on her behalf because she has more of a support system than others. So take her as like the gold star standard of sickle cell care in New York City.
Yeah, I mean, the idea that we're going to trust billionaires to, from 30,000 feet, look down at some numbers and be like, oh, we'll cross that off just for, it's a very perverse. So what's the solution here that we should be working towards on a state level?
I think the first stop, New York Health Act. The New York Health Act is really important because it's the bill in the state legislature that would make, just like what you finally got in California, would actually make healthcare free at point of service, no co-pays or deductibles, expand elder care, provide more money and funding for home health aides, mental health care for New Yorkers all across the way. And of course, it would result in increased taxes for all of those libertarian hawks that tend to want to be whatnot. But in a testimony that was done on the New York Health Act a couple of years ago, I think this has to be 2019. There was a comptroller for Albany that actually said that he actually how do I call it? So the comptroller literally had said, this is the Albany comptroller, that a lot of the taxes that are currently a part of property taxes are what we pay to cover the healthcare and pensions for the healthcare for public sector workers. who work for the city of Albany. And he had mentioned he spoke to other comptrollers across New York State, and they had represented similar things. And getting the New York Health Act, and I don't take this for what you will, for all of those libertarian hawks about increased taxes. What? If we were to get the New York Health Act, it would actually allow for a reduction in property taxes, because they wouldn't have to pay the public sector healthcare benefits out of the property taxes, which is the current regime that is here in New York State. Now, personally, I was part of the push for that the DSA and the whole slew of progressive organizations had in 2021 with the Invest in Our New York bills, where we pushed the tax the rich. We had this movement had secured billions in additional funding added to the New York State budget to fund a lot of the things that we needed, right? So, because I think billionaires need to pay their fair share for this full stop, right? But I say this because for a lot of meeting people where they're at in the community, because they are thinking that the taxes are going to be put on them instead of on the billionaires. It was never quite done in that way, so they don't have a framework for this as we break it down. It's something that I think is worth saying as we continue to make sure that the rich pay their fair share.
Yeah. And just what comes out of that Health Act?
So because co-pays and deductibles would be free at point of service, any New Yorker, regardless of immigration status, would be able to go to any hospital and get the care that they needed. No need to worry about any insurance cards or whatnot. No need for identifications for those who are afraid of being retaliated against because of immigration issues. New York is a sanctuary city. I know that's been used pejoratively in a lot of ways, but there are some things that are being done at both the city and the state level to offer more protections for people of undocumented status. There is also the fact that this would expand more funding for safety net hospitals. So hospitals like Kings County, which is a public hospital, which is the whipping boy of fans of austerity who want to defund things. It's the first hospital to get defunded because it largely serves a lot of undocumented folks. In fact, it's the largest healthcare system in the country, serves hundreds of thousands of immigrants and undocumented folks. But once again, this hospital, which serves a larger number of those undocumented folks, is the first to receive budget cuts every single time. So these hospitals would also receive much more funding, and it would take a little bit of funding from like the New York Presbyterians and the really well privately funded hospitals to make sure all hospitals can treat the people that they have. But
yeah, I mean, I think that's just anecdotally. I have a friend from Mount Vernon, and the relief that she had that her mom can now get care in Delaware versus the hospital in the area where it looks as like a place you might not come out of. Like it's serious stuff. I want to ask you finally about the coalitions you're working with. Particularly DSA Slate, but anybody else you want to mention? Oh yeah, no, our coalition is pretty extensive. So outside of the DSA incumbents who have endorsed, AOC and Cynthia Nixon who endorsed, just the organizations, New York Communities for Change. I like to note them first because they're the remnants of ACORN, who were a very powerful organizing force for progressive politics across this country. The remnants of them reformed and restructured into New York Communities for Change. So we got them on our side. New York Working Families Party, the Sunrise Movement, Run for Something, Indivisible BK, Food and Water Action, the Jewish Vote, Jim Owls, the Met Council, Moms Demand Action, and Vocal New York. We have it's pretty extensive. We've been able to get the majority of all of the progressive organizations behind us. We have been working to build more and more local community support from churches. By the time the election's over, we will probably gone through over 50 plus churches as places to have conversations and organize. Churches are let's be real. Church, when
the social welfare net was defunded, and a lot of what was being provided in the public sector was disappearing. It was the church where a lot of these things were actually taking over that gap, and the amount of food pantries and mutual aid that is provided in this district that largely keeps people afloat is done in large by the churches. So we had to go into the churches to kind of do this. Now, even I say all that, but it is still a drop in the hat because Brooklyn is the borough of churches. There is more churches in Brooklyn than any of the other boroughs combined. In any 5-block stretch, in not only in this district but across Brooklyn, particularly in Central and East Brooklyn, you will pass by 5 to 7 churches. 5 to 7 churches over like 3 to 5 blocks. That's how many churches there are. Just want to put that out there. So, but we're continuing this work of organizing with different churches because we got to meet people where they're at. The churches are a big spot, particularly Episcopal churches, because Episcopal churches are part of the Anglican churches. They are very progressive. You'll find many progressive people there, people part of the LGBTQ members who are kind of pushed out of spaces like the Catholic Church, often go to Episcopal churches, which are almost identical to Catholic churches, for the exception that they do accept them. These are the same churches that you'll find will be allies on abortion rights. These are the ones who are going to be allies on fighting to ensure to expand the rights of working people everywhere. And there's a shit ton of them all across Brooklyn, all across the city. These are one of the key places that we should be organizing in the rank of tons of progressive other Protestant churches that are across the bay. And you'll find people who are willing to listen, people who are empathetic, people who are tired of seeing the same old. And when we talk about the rent's out of control, getting the rent under control, we talk about universal health care, we talk about creating jobs and opportunities through the Green New Deal, or in this case, a Green New York. You talk about public safety, and instead of the supply side, we're going to get more cops because that's the solution that we've been pursuing as a city, as this country for so long. And we go into looking at how about we create jobs like librarian? We invest in the community. We allow librarians, cure violence coordinators, other jobs that would benefit the community, and pay them the same we pay cops and corrections officers. You think that people would do those jobs? Like I could tell you family members, cousins, aunts, uncles, community members we spoke at the doors who will tell you, oh, I was a teacher, I was a social worker, I was a community health worker, I did this, I did that, but I couldn't make it, so I became a corrections officer, I became a police officer. That's what they had to do. And what if we were to then say, let's create these type of jobs, we'll pay the same amount. Our public safety platform is insisting that we can actually create 25,000 of these jobs in New York State, 5,000 a year, where we could actually make this a reality in the city. Like that, those are the things that get people turning their head to stop and say, I like that. And then when you show up at the church, you get involved with mutual aid, food pantries, you do that work. And then you begin to and then that begins to change the dynamic for them, because then they realize you're serious. They realize that you're not just talk, that you're actually going to do something for the community. And that is what we've been able to use to continue to build power. Because what is power but organized money, organized people? And all of the work that I've done, whether it's been as a advocate for sickle cell disease, whether it's been a community health worker, whether it's been as a fatherhood advocate, whether it's been as a parent advocate for improved investment into our children, education outcomes, particularly for the ages 0 and 3. The fact that I got involved with building a food pantry mutual aid network that serviced over 2,000 people across the city during the pandemic and then beyond. Whether it's the work that I did in DSA and these other coalitions around pushing for these essential legislations that we need to create the stability and the space to allow more organizing in workplaces across this district, across this country, across the state, really, like all of these things, I can go back to that central moment. And to me, like, talking about I know you didn't ask the question, but talking about why am I running? Why is it important to have, I think, more electeds like this? You know, if you don't have a coalition that's like what we had with the New Deal of trade unionists, I would actually add for now worker cooperatives and cooperatives. You know, this is my little addendum there. Socialists, communists, people of the left, who to kind of be key in other positions, whether it's in unions, whether it's in cooperatives, whether it's in office, whether it's in community organizations, nonprofit sectors, churches, to really put together this coalition to build the power necessary to change the system. You know, that's the name of the game. And for me, I realized that I was a democratic socialist because I was seeing the BS with my wife. I was working as first a home health aide, then eventually an Uber driver, and I was seeing that my wages were going lower and lower and lower, and my responsibilities were increasing. My debt was increasing. It was really difficult, and you know, to me, you know, I was very fortunate to have a lot of support. You know, my brother, who was a DSA member before me and is also a patron and fan of the shows, actually it started introducing me to it was actually podcasts, audiobooks and whatnot of left. Like, so when I first started driving, you know, there's a huge amount of dead time, right? And you know, it's very alienating, isolating. You know, you're alone, and while it's always fun to talk with someone, and it's great connectivity when you have someone in the car, but when you don't, all of those pressures weigh back onto you. And it was during this time I would turn on like the Majority Report, the TMBS, like Reckoning, Chapel Trap House, Citations Needed, the This Is Revolution podcast, whatever, all these different like amazing like podcasts, right? And to me, it was during these periods where I could listen and learn and start to question and then have conversations about that. This is actually how I actually learned about DSA and got involved with Organized with DSA. The conversations you guys had, if I can be a little, I'll have my geek out moment now. Listening to you guys in 2018 when you talked about when Jane was talking about ISO and DSA and other organizations, those conversations were and informed my conversations that I had with my brother and other members about being a part of an institution, because organizations that I was a part of were doing essential work keeping people afloat, but not really transforming the change that we wanted to see. So I knew I had to be a part of an organization, institution. What was I going to choose? And you guys were very conveniently having this discussion, and I was able to kind of learn and kind of take advantage of that. Understanding the universality of the moment, how it's not only just me, and it's not only just here in New York or even this country, and that these struggles are universal. The struggles that we see with workers in Brazil, throughout all of Latin America, throughout West Africa, throughout the Middle East. You can, as you guys have kind of covered pretty well already, in all these different sectors, there's a lot of solidarity of all these moments. And the fact that all of these labor strikes, these worker actions are happening all around the same time, I think is not a coincidence, and actually does have synergistic effects across the board. There are many workers within our cooperatives who hail from Brazil, who hail from Grenada, where they had other liberatory struggles, who hail from Jamaica and remember the movements of Michael Manley started originally before the IMF and World Bank interfered, who remember the fights of Patrice Lumumba, of Thomas Sankara, who are part of that ilk. Even me as a Haitian American of this diaspora, who can call from the Haitian Revolution, from my family members who are part of this struggle, who through their lived experience and where I live now, can kind of see the connection to my moment and make a decision to be a part of that organizing and that action. A lot of these things were able to come. I was able to make these connections as a result of that political education, which for me I received through shows like this and stuff like that. And I think is a very important piece when we talk about how do we build the consciousness. How do we build this movement? How can elected officials or electoralism be a useful tool for building movement? Because electoralism is not where it ends or starts. I think we can look at it in that lens, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. I love all that, and I also want to mention. I'm glad you mentioned "This Is Revolution" because what you were saying about the churches will be music to Jason and Pascal's ears. They definitely need to book you because that is something that they have been hammering on, and to see somebody actually do it, it's very encouraging. David Alexis at David4BK, the number 4BK on Twitter. Where else should people go to support you?
Yes, you can check us out at our website at davidforbk.com, where they can actually check out some of the op-eds that we release, because we actually have been doing a lot of work about talking about this vision through different op-eds. You can find that on our website. You can also find ways that you can get involved with our campaign, whether it's phone banking, canvassing, all other stuff that requires a grassroots campaign requires. And otherwise, like you said, at David the number 4BK on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. We need every hand to be involved. This is going to take a village, a city, like a movement to truly allow for many of the things I talked about to become a reality.
David Alexis, thanks so much. And that'll be it for this edition of the Lech Stream interviews, the very first Lech Stream interviews. Thank you, David.
Appreciate that. And first, thank you for letting me to be the first one.
Hello. Hi there, folks. Yeah. Really enjoyed talking to David there. And yeah, I could have that went quite a bit longer than I was expecting, but there was just so much to get into, and I was happy to have him on, especially because he said all those nice things too. That's an added bonus. Um, Gonna play some 2K and then get out of here. Uh, Let me start that up now. Um, Gonna be playing as the Wolves. And let's see, do I got my game capture going? Still Obra Dinn. Okay. How's everybody doing? Friday night. I gotta say, like, all of my cousins were in a group chat, very negative on the Gobert trade, and I'm zagging on it. I don't even know if I'm in control of the zag. Uh, you know, I'm excited about it. It's funny. Like, I mean, I watched the Clippers just roast with Paul George and hurt Kawhi Leonard, just destroy the Utah Jazz in the playoffs, not last year, but the year before. And it was but the thing is and so I thought like, oh, Gobert's out, he sucks. But I go to Thinking Basketball's YouTube page. He's got some Gobert vids that I think acquit the man. He's French. I like France. I've been to Paris twice in my life. Been fortunate in that way, and it's fun in 2K. So that's what we're gonna do, a little bit of that. Am I in window mode? Yes, good. That's good. Just give me a second to set everything up here. See this out of my head. Oh yeah, I did shave it. Autumn leaves. I did. I saw Autumn surprised at that. Um, okay, let me just do that. Boom. Okay, folks. Play a little bit of this. I'm gonna keep the sound off though because copyright. I'm sure there's a way I can see the chat. Let me figure out that. Oh, here we go. Yes. Let me catch up with so, some chat here. Excuse me. It's out of my tool bag, you little rat. My cat's going in there. Gobert got traded to the Timberwolves for probably too much picks. Muffin Scorcher, as a Utah Jazz fan, he is great, a defensive asset, but don't know if he was worth the amount of picks you guys gave up. Yeah, I mean, the thing is we've always had picks. I mean, I'm ready to have players, and he's a little bit older than I'd want. He's a little bit limited offensively than I want, but I like that they're throwing in. The best argument that I've heard is you want Ant to be winning as early as possible, and I like that. Um, yeah, and he is a little bit old, but look, if he can just have a nice 3 years, it's not catastrophic. If he gets hurt or something, we're in trouble. Oh no, I tell you what, I cannot be made to feel bad about this haircut. I'm enjoying it way too much. I was hiking in Montana last week, and the thought of having had my mane up there, it would have been horrible, and that's why I got a cut. So actually, I need to change my guy here. We need to change just my hair. Give me a not balding. This is a widow's peak that I will have you know has remained basically this shape since high school. The last time I had a buzz cut, so cropped long. That's close enough. We're not gonna get too fancy. Not Glacier, just Red Lodge, Montana. Second time I've been there. Okay, let's get back in the game. I'm also pretty good in this. Yeah, I stacked my guy, and I made Edwards really good. So that when I tweeted out that it works in 2K, it's also because there's a little bit of wish fulfillment going on there. I don't want to. I'll play the Pellies because they got a good squad. I do not like the Timberwolves jerseys. I'll have you know that. They haven't topped these ones, as far as I'm concerned, with the little trees. I'd be happy with the Celtics. Yeah, yeah. I bought a Celtics hat and happy to have it. I think they're still a good squad. I think Tatum. I like Tatum. He feels a lot of pressure, I'm sure, but I like him. And hopefully, what's his name stays healthy. The new acquisition. Yeah, I'm gonna get a Davos Scumwad. I'm gonna get a Pistons hat. That's my next hat. That's my new young team. I have like I got a Memphis Grizzlies hat when they beat the Warriors in the playoff game a few years ago. Pistons are, and that was sort of like, this is my new team I want to adopt, mainly because of Ja. I mean, I like Triple J, but um, and now it's the Pistons. I'm all in on the Pistons. Yeah, Brogdon should be really like if everyone stays healthy, especially Brogdon would be such a added. I mean, a guy that can handle the ball. Um, Towns on Zion. That's gonna be a good matchup. That's the thing with Gobert is there's not a whole lot of teams that like he'll be able to play quite a bit in the regular season, and honestly, if they stagger him and Towns in the playoffs, that's not so bad. Probably be a little bit dinged up or something, one of them. If it, I also think it gives you the best sort of conditions for seeing what Towns is about. Uh, and if I cut it off, need more Manasi. Uh, um, it like I love Carl Anthony Towns. But I also think like we need to figure out if he's the guy to pair with Edwards or not, and we need to figure out that soon. And I think having a guy that compensates for so much of his um weaknesses is a good way to do that. I also like Jaden. Oh no, brick. I'm playing on kind of a high difficulty, but maybe I'll adjust that later. I'm usually much worse playing on Twitch. Look at that. We just grab every board. Herb Jones. Drop ball there. Yeah, Washington. Yeah, that is interesting. This is a franchise mode. Let me um, catch up here. Kyrie's still. I think Kyrie's starting with the Nets next year. I am just playing. I'm just playing single player. Everything about this exemplifies the glories of capitalism. Enjoy your leisure entrepreneurial time. Yeah, thanks, Nick. Cheers. It's funny to talk like that, and people think they're coming out on top of looking cool somehow. The glories. Um, that's not who developed computers. And guess who's looking to Congress to meet demand? Taxpayer money. See, that's the thing that sucks with Gobert is you swing it to him and it's Rudy. Okay. Yeah, APEC, that's gonna be we're gonna have to do something about that. We're gonna do some APEC content, DM Democratic Majority for Israel content. It's really annoying. And it's like basically if like I don't know, it's Democratic Majority for Jim Crow. It is hard to read the chat and also play this game. But look at that, getting a steal because my steal stats are stacked. Let's outlet that. Bang. Thank you, Carl. Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, we've had Emma Kinema on about organizing within video games. I mean, like any entertainment industry or any industry that attracts people not only because of compensation but because of profits or because of passions. People are passionate to join the film industry. There's a lot of, I mean, the casting couch is like you know, a trope. Um, that exists in sports, that exists in music, obviously, and I mean anywhere. Oh God, it's a bad pass. Oh, sleeping, sleeping on that. Uh, I feel like pick and roll with Jonas is the best. Yes, and one. Uh, in your view, do you view Israel to be a Western colonial state, occupation, or just plainly an apartheid state? Yeah, I mean, I think apartheid is not a word I would shy away from at all. Um, I'm not the first to go there, obviously. And yeah, a client of Western states, although that that may not be permanent. It's funny, like you look at South Africa, and I didn't know until I'm not sure which book I read. It was after Michael Brooks's passing. Um, I've forgotten or didn't really pick up when I read World War II history that at that point, um, South Africa had sided with the Nazis over Britain because mainly for the reasons one might expect. I think that maybe that's probably a bit of a reductive summary, but um, those sorts of like if Israel could have another client, I think they could. That's what when I see how sort of ill-advised I feel Israeli politicians are with threatening um like what could be a bipartisan thing, and when Netanyahu came and basically like just spoke to Republicans, right? Like that seemed like a questionable thing just from a why would you rock the boat that much standpoint. But because like I could probably, I mean, I'm not an expert on that stuff, but it just seems like they don't give a fuck. So I'm trying to focus. I'm actually gonna this is actually a really tough game to watch the chat and play. So I'm just gonna take a few more questions and maybe log off. Thanks for the compliment, Ron M. If there was one city you think could be targeted to push for municipal ownership of sports teams, which would it be? I don't know because even the NFL they don't allow that anymore. They've pretty much said that the NFL is the last one. Uh, Let me look this way. The NFL is going to be the last, or the Green Bay Packers are going to be the last team to do that. So it has to come from the players probably. Like that's where the movement is in terms of empowerment, and it'd be a shame if it all just fizzled into Kevin Durant can demand a trade with 4 years after his contract. If that's all player empowerment left to, if it led to something where cities, but I think probably first players, right? Because municipal ownership, if you're still like drafting players, like there's something weird about you about that stuff. Just is from the like you own the players level, so it needs to be some sort of partnership, I think, between players and municipalities. Uh, let's see. The minor league cities that just got contracted by the MLB would be a great opportunity. You can watch decent AA and AAA talent, independent leagues. Yeah, I should. I want to hear about more about that. My cousin actually spent a lot of time in the minors. Be curious what his perspective is on that. Thanks, Easy 1977. I think it looks nice too. I'm really happy with it. I gotta say, it's every day that it's been hot. I've just thanked myself for going through with the decision. Need more Manasi. I did a lot of volunteering for Krista Gonzalez yesterday, and the people I called seemed really excited and volunteering for canvassing and stuff. does her winning seem likely right now? I'm not a pollster, and I think anyone who saw the beginning of that or the certain events in that knows that I don't follow that stuff insanely closely, but there's people that I follow that are volunteering for her as well seem optimistic. Maybe that's just the way that you want to seem, but yeah. Did I miss any questions here? Yeah, I could do a mohawk. I've done like ones for school spirit things in high school and stuff like that, but never maintained one for a long time. But so I'm just gonna go with this exact same haircut every few weeks for a while until like. But that is something I may veer towards in the future. All right, folks, I'm going to call it a Friday. I appreciate you all hanging out with me and David, Alexis as well. And Think Tank will be up for patrons on Sunday. And that is that. Peace.